fairly afternoon. Welcome to the Digital Preservation Roundtable. For those of you who were expecting Susanna Mills to be the host of this, I am not she. My name is Gary Lowe, and I'm batting substitute for Susanna, who took ill, unfortunately. She's doing okay. She's recovering from COVID, but you're going to have to put up with me instead. This is a panel discussion, and I've got a whole bunch of questions. I'm sure that you as well. I'll ask you to hold those until the second part of the program. But let me introduce the panel to you. Right next to me is Natalie Mitchell. She is the librarian for the Harry Sutherland Philatelic Library at the Vincent Graves Green Foundation in Toronto. If you have not been there, you don't know what you're missing. It's just a wonderful facility. A few partisans in the audience, I see. And next to her is Scott Tiffany. He is the managing editor of Lynn's Stamp News, Scott Monthly, and the Scott Catalogs. Scott is also immediately before that the head librarian at the American Philatelic Research Library, and a good friend, I might add. On the Zoom call with us is Jeff Hobart.
Hi.
The American Philatelic Research Library. Jeff is our digital librarian, and as such, I'm sure he's going to have a lot to add to this conversation on digital.
I hope so.
This is Jay Smith. Jay's a philatelic dealer and a Scandinavian expert. Jay is one of those dealers, the type of which we need more of in this hobby, because he is so willing to share from his vast expertise on so many areas within philately beyond the Scandinavian aspect, which is what he specializes in as a dealer. Some time ago, Jay, who writes a regular newsletter, wrote an article, "How long until our canary stops singing?" And that's been republished, I guess, in a couple of different journals as well. That article, which I commend to all of your attention, because Jay's canary was singing very loud about the digital concerns. It was that article that really served as a big motivator for this roundtable today. So thank you all for participating.
Good afternoon.
And Jeff Hobart's responsibilities include taking a lot of paper documents and digitizing those, and
Yeah.
are all kinds of concerns, of course, associated with making all of that kind of infrastructure and information preservation robust enough to survive well into the future. But that's not really the direct concern of today's panel, which is more about born digital assets. For example, websites, forums, digital photographs, scans and videos, electronic records of all kinds, and even recorded Zoom conversations, such as what we are doing today. How are those going to survive into the future? What are the threats that we're facing with those? So let's start by picking up some examples and see if we can get an understanding, a baseline understanding of the scope of the problem. Jay, since you kicked off the idea for this forum, why don't I ask you to start with some examples of what you see as being under threat?
Okay. Well, it's all my fault, I guess. The uh, uh, the key thing that is instigated. Well, it's a subject I've been interested in for years, but the key thing that instigated this most recent burst of thinking about it was the uh, presence of a couple of major sites. One of them related to U.S. philately, one of them related to Hawaiian philately, where the owners of the sites are still alive, still vital people, etc., just not interested in uh, either in case of one site, the U.S. site, not interested in stamps anymore, and in the case of the Hawaiian site, still very much interested in stamps, just not that particular subject matter and that amount of work involved with maintaining an enormous website. Particularly one that gathers content or used to gather content from dozens of sources. Um, both of these sites are likely to go dark when those people decide to stop paying the bill or they pass away, etc., unless somebody has picked up the mantle and has carried them on. In at least one case, I believe there have been conversations along that line, but I don't know if anything's happened yet. So those are just two very large and very important, but just two of thousands of websites. Another example is the website on worldwide forgeries, where the owner is a Danish gentleman who has been experiencing life and is too busy working and living and having family and so forth to put in the bazillion hours a day he was putting into developing a very useful website. Um, the the other extreme, you have everything all the way back to CD that may have content on them in old-fashioned HTML, which fortunately our browser is still able to use, but just not as well. Or DVDs, but the problem, of course, is that most of the DVD players and CD players are things you now find in antique stores. And if you have bought a computer in the last couple of years, you've probably bought a computer that could not play a DVD or a CD. And this just goes on and on and on and on. Also, most people don't understand that DVDs and CDs do not last forever. You hear all sorts of statements about how long they will last. I've I've heard a variety of people complaining about things failing after 15 or 20 years already. But you read the manufacturer's packaging, you think they're going to be around when archaeologists 2,000 years from now excavate us. But the reality is that that's just not the case. So all of this needs to be moved forward. It needs to be preserved in the first place, but it needs to be moved forward onto new digital platforms. And this is a continuous process. It will never end if we want to save the information. So that's just the basic overview. A couple of things that I sort of think about that I think are worth keeping in mind are that, number one, in the future, you will not control what you do not now control. Sort of one of those Yogi Bearism kind of things. But if you stop and think about it, if you don't have a handle on it now, you're not going to have a handle on it in the future. Number two, never assume that even the most solid companies or services or software will continue to exist. If you disagree with that, please search on the subject on the AOL website or ask your friends on MySpace or write about it using the latest version of WordPerfect, which I still think is the best word processing software ever invented. And then the other thing, which I did not include in my article, but which is something just to keep in your radar, is that more and more software these days that content creators are using, whether it's Adobe Photoshop or whether it's Microsoft Word or just all sorts of things, um, are being sold now as software as service, SAS. And you don't actually own the software. It only runs via the internet. You just get to use it for a little while. You own your documents, but your documents aren't much good if you need to do something with them 30 years from now and you don't have access to that program. This further endangers the stability of things content creators are working on, both presently and in the future, because the software as service contracts tend to give all the power to the service provider and none to the user. So that's just something else on the horizon.
All right, thank you, Jay. By the way, Jay, I happen to have the WordPerfect 5.1 floppies on my desk at home. So if you need them, I will gladly lend them to you.
I'm still under virtual computer in a computer. I'm still running versions of Windows 95 and so forth. So I'm using WordPerfect 8.1. Thank you very much.
All right, IBM 1401 emulation some other time. Can you add to this disconcerting list of that's under threat?
I mean, I can certainly jump in, and I mean, Jay is definitely preaching to the choir here. It's a lot of these. The list of these problems are exactly what we're tackling now. Since I stepped into the role in last January. So we are including optical media rot, disk rot, the physical decay of optical media that we're looking to, we're right in the process of starting an initiative to deal with that on top of everything else. So, but yeah, no, software as service, understanding, legacy software, finding ways to read optical media that may be out of date or in the process of decay, any born digital materials, which also includes most modern philatelic journals, because of in terms of we're as philatelist stamp societies, it's an independent research organization, so resource paucity is a concern. So of course it's incredibly expensive to print monthly or quarterly physical paper journal. So most journals have moved to digital only. So those are also at risk of disappearing as a result of becoming a born digital object. So these are, it's all very, very, it's concerning. I wouldn't call, I don't want to sound doom and gloom and dire or anything like that. It's a surmountable problem that we need to have in the forefront of our mind and understand that the amount of resources we'll need to devote to it as both, organizations like the APS will have to keep that in mind, but also just the philatelic community in general, building these best practices into their research, into their endeavors, into anything like an extensive database of Hawaiian stamp information, for example, that could disappear at a moment's notice, or the umpteen physical Folodexes that I see from the folks that come into the American Philatelic Research Library that I am amazed are still active and ever growing, and what we need to do to preserve things like that in terms of maybe digitizing them, converting them into databases. There's a lot of strings, threads, concerns, initiatives, action plans, lists and lists of things that we need to think about and do to try to surmount information loss in the community. I mean, so much philatelic knowledge is just locked inside the brains of philatelists, even, that may or may not even reach some sort of physical form. And what do we do with when the one expert on a particular subject may pass away? What do we do with that? I mean, I know one APS member who is probably the only expert on Belgian railway cancels in the entire community, and he has independently created a very, very massive Excel database of Belgian railway cancels, but we aren't sure what to do with it, and he isn't sure what to do with it in the meantime. It's just his passion. So a lot of this research just comes out of a person's passionate need to manifest all of this information that they care about. And so unfortunately it takes inconvenient forms. It's suffers limited resources. It's, understanding what to do with these objects as they are manifested is going to be the biggest problem with digital preservation, moving into the future, especially in the philatelic community.
Yeah, that spreadsheets and other forms of local digital objects are an entire realm within the digital preservation concern. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, we love a spreadsheet.
Natalie?
Oh gosh, well, I think that Jay and Jeff have done a phenomenal job of covering a lot of the big topics, but something that I'll add in just an additional challenge, a little twist, is that it is very hard for the digital materials that you have created to live on beyond you if you do not have a plan for your digital estate. So if you don't have your passwords managed in a way where someone who's managing your estate, whether it be a family member, or if you're working with the APRL or the Green Foundation in Canada to have your material live on, it's very hard for them to make that dream a reality if your passwords are not shared in a way that is helpful, or if you maybe, gosh, yeah, just making sure that you have taken a digital audit and planned for the future of your materials, rather than assuming that, oh, I'll just hand my computer over to whoever's estate, they'll handle it. If you don't give them the password to it, they won't be able to help you. So I think making sure that you've thought about it the same way you think about your physical assets, I think that lays it out in a structure that makes sense to folks. And at the Green Foundation, for example, we are starting a program where we're archiving websites that are Canadian in focus, because our focus is Canadian and British North American philately. And if someone wants to leave their website to us, if they're unable to manage it, if they pass away and they want to leave it to us, we will take that website on and host it for them. It just means that they need to plan ahead. So we have the passwords. So we know what they want. We know if they want it to be built upon or if they want it to remain static. Currently, we're only doing static, but if someone came to us with a database that needed more work and they couldn't finish it, but they wanted it to continue on, working with an organization, maybe even a local club. I know Benaps in Canada has maintained a blog for one of their members who passed away, was no longer able to maintain the site and pay for it, but Benaps took it on and holds it as a legacy static blog. And I think that finding organizations and finding ways that organizations can support individual philatelists is really key in making sure that the material becomes accessible or remains accessible. It's such a shame to see such amazing work just disappear, just blink off of the internet. And there's a lot of interesting ways we'll get into about how you can archive a site if you don't have access if you worry about not having access. There's ways to archive it yourself, but I think that working with a larger organization ensures broader access. So that's my additional piece.
Scott, you're in the middle of an organization that produces probably more philatelic content than anyone else on the planet, I imagine. Or if you're not number one, you're number two. And all of this stuff now is starting off as digital. What are you seeing in your position?
I just want to start off with probably the most controversial thing but it's the librarian in me that has to say this, is that putting something digital is not preservation.
Yes.
Putting something or something in digital form is great for keeping, but I wouldn't call it preservation. It is access. The biggest thing that when something is born digital or is digital, or we're going to turn it into something digital, we can search it, we can access it, so when we're sort of talking about the different challenges that we have with this going forward, that's really the biggest challenge. We can have something in a CD-ROM or Gary, I can remember floppy disks too. On the disk, but if we can't search it, we can't access it, it's really not of any value at all. So that's the biggest challenge. I don't want to speak too much about what Lynn's is doing, sort of going forward. It is a challenge with us too there as well, that we know a lot of our subscribers to the catalog or to the magazine want a paper copy, that paper copy. And it's sort of ironic when you think about it that I remember when I first walked into the APRL and I couldn't believe all this was written about philately. It was just stunning to me. Is that sometimes when you really think about it, sometimes that's accessible, that's being stored, that's still there. And CDs, and Natalie was mentioning, and Jay has mentioned as well, that those CDs or DVDs or whatever you have at home, even USB, those little USB drives, they don't last forever. I mean, and in some cases, that paper copy is going to last longer than that digital project that you have. So, and that's not to say that that's the best way to preserve it, but I just want to make that clear to start, that we can't think of in terms of, oh, we just digitize it, saved forever. It's just, it needs to be accessible and stuff. A lot of it's already been covered, but there's some, I don't know where we're going to go with this, Gary, but there is hope out there. There are projects already being done to save things like websites and things like that. Natalie mentioned that they're doing it at the Green. I know Marion Mills at the APRL, we've had long talks about sort of saving websites that sort of disappear. This first came to my attention just after Jay sent out his email. I had a very important member who sort of contacted me, and there was this website that she always used for New York City cancels. It's a great website. I saw it, she says, and I went there one day and it's gone. Like, what happened to it? And I sort of put her on, and this is where a little bit of hope exists. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Wayback Machine. If you're not, you should. It captures websites on a regular basis, even ones that are dead. And it's run through an organization. I have some good friends who work with the Internet Archive, sort of run through them. And they archive websites. Now, that doesn't mean they're functional. Some of them might still have certain functions that still work and others that don't. But they capture them on a fairly regular basis. They do snapshots. And if you ever do a search, usually what you need is a link, and you search for that link. And if it's there in the archive, it'll come up the Wayback Machine, and then it'll give you dates when it was last captured and things like that. So that's what I set this member to, and she was thrilled. Then she still has a link to this archive site. So it is being done. It's just, it is a real challenge when you think about all the different types of media that are in this hobby. This is a visual hobby. It's almost a tangible hobby. You need to sort of hold things in your hands and things like that. And how do you capture that? I know Jeff has mentioned a few things that they're doing at the APRL, but they're also doing objects. So in the archives that sort of you can see in 3 dimensions and things like that. So how do you make sure that gets preserved over time? Again, I hate using that term, we're talking digital. But I don't know if that answered your question, Gary, but
well, there's an endless
it's
set of answers.
It's just
Yeah.
This part of the discussion is outlining the list of things we should be terrorized about. I'll add that I learned last night, which is that the Richard Frajola has announced that his discussion board, which is home to many of the most advanced philatelic discussions you will find, that discussion board he is shutting down. Not immediately. He's planning for its demise, but he is putting it to sleep. That engendered a whole discussion on the Frajola board about not just the future of his site, but similar kinds of discussion sites as well. So there's a, pardon me, there's a dichotomy here between these born digital assets. There are those that exist through the internet, on the web, and there are those that are in individual personal archives here or there. So my first question to the panel is, in an ideal world, what would a solution look like to deal with preventing the death of born digital assets? Anybody want to jump in on that? What's the ideal platform?
Unfortunately, magnetic tape is really good, but I don't recommend that for everyone.
Yeah, that is a good idea.
People have the facilities for that, so I won't recommend that necessarily, though. Once again, finding a physical form is usually the most stable version, though I don't recommend printing out all of your emails. Please don't do that. That's so much. Oh gosh, that's really a challenging question. I think that the initiative we're taking on at the Green Foundation is a version of an ideal solution, because we will be maintaining websites that still have functionality. That's the really tricky part with the Internet Archive, where if you have a website that perhaps you have thinking of like postmark reveal, which is fine, it's not going anywhere as far as I know, but you have to upload an image into postmark reveal for it to do anything. Otherwise, you're just sitting there looking at a screen that says upload. And if postmark reveal is on the Internet Archive, you can't upload an image to the Internet Archive's version and have it run postmark reveal on it. It will sit there. So you know postmark reveal existed, you know what it looked like at various points, but you can't actually interact with it. Same with blogs and forums, or forums specifically. Well, actually blogs and forums, you aren't able to search typically in the Internet Archive versions. You could type something into a search bar and hit enter, and then it says that page wasn't archived because archive the specific search results for that term, which means that the website is there. You can click through some of the pages, but you're not going to be able to get in deeper. And I think that's the challenge with many of the solutions. Most web archiving platforms that I'm familiar with are very just static versions of the sites that are non-interactive. And I think that an ideal world, my beautiful, perfect digital world, would have interactive versions of the websites. And so, as I said, we're doing a small version of that at the Green, but for Canadian material. So I would hope that other large institutions would take on similar projects to have these websites that are still interactive be made accessible. So from a website perspective, that's my beautiful world.
I mean, Natalie took mine. That was kind of, the and like an interactive virtual machine environment where like an ever living repository of material that one could interact with would be, I mean, that's all magical thinking right now. I mean, that would take an enormous amount of resources, but it is that would be that would be kind of the perfect idea of being able to, and having someone just be able to access that entire environment and, have these emulated versions of old blogs and old sites and old, stamp wikis and et cetera, databases. That would be the ideal. It would be really lovely. And if there was a mobile version, that'd be even better.
What Jeff hit on with the enormous amount of resources, I think is the overarching key to this.
Yeah.
Actually may come down to one or two individuals, stamp collectors, Bill Gross, Warren Buffett, people like that, who, if they were to get passionate about this subject, could be potentially able to endow those resources. But if that doesn't happen, this is going to be more of a guerrilla operation lasting forever, as long as people care. And it's hard. It's very, very hard because so much of it does need to be done under somebody referred to virtual, does need to be run under virtual environments to run the databases behind those dynamic websites. That can be done. It is done. Governments do it on a regular basis. This kind of thing is it is rocket science, but it's not impossible. But it's very expensive, and not just expensive in terms of raw money, but expensive in terms about finding the people with the passion to do the work. And it's highly complex work in many cases.
So what I'm hearing here is there's two different facets to digital preservation. One is ensuring the ongoing integrity of the bits and bytes that represent in digital form, just having it preserved so you can look at it. But the other, and I think more complicated aspect, is preserving the functionality which those assets currently have to ensure that accessibility will be at the same, or even perhaps ideally at a higher level than what we have now. And that's a real challenge. Jay, to your point about funding, maybe we should each buy a lottery ticket a week. And when we hit it big, we'll know how to spend it, not just on stamps for our collection, or the greater good of philately. In addition to the operational challenges that we face, forget about the ideal platform for a solution, but for any solution at all going forward, if you're taking somebody else's digital assets and wanting to use them, you may or may not have permission. There's a lot of scraping of web pages out there that hasn't been authorized by the owner of that intellectual property, but it still goes on. That's a lot of what the Wayback Machine is doing. If you don't shut your website down to scraping, it can be scraped without your permission. This stuff can be grabbed and stored someplace, but what are the challenges we face in terms of things like permissions and other operational impediments? What does the panel think about how we surmount the non-technical aspects of these assets?
Well, Jeff can speak to this as well. When I was with the APRL, that was our biggest challenge, was making sure that we had permissions to, and ours weren't they're as concrete as they could be. We would reach out to either the president of the society. One of the things I did during COVID was, with all the downtime we had, was I reached out to every society I could think of, reached out to their president, reached out to their editor, sort of see if they'd be willing to have their journals in the digital library. And there's nothing concrete with that. So I could sort of get permission from both those entities. And what if an author comes along several years later and says, I didn't give you permission to have my article that's in that journal to be digitally available to people? So copyright's it's a big issue, and I don't claim to be an expert in that. I've done a fair amount of research involving that when it comes to digital entities, and it's very tricky. It's not just, Gary's mentioned data scraping, and that happens more than you realize. Information is going sometimes, but it is a big challenge. It's something Natalie was mentioning. I just want to sort of go into a little bit of that. One of the things that I think libraries especially are sort of dealing with are what are called digital management plans, where she was talking about sort of 10 years from now, or 15 years, but also sort of how is this going to be preserved? How is it going to be maintained? How are we going to make sure that copyright's still in order? costs are always a big thing. Storage is probably the biggest cost in all of that when you're sticking it up server somewhere and things like that. And maintenance, ongoing maintenance, upgrades. How does that happen? Things like that. So, but getting back to copyright, it is a big challenge. It was one of the things that we tried to write up, we ran it by the APS lawyer, that sort of makeshift copyright statement that when somebody signed it, that it had some validity, but it is definitely a challenge. It's not just, it's all well and good to say that we want to sort of save these things for posterity, but it doesn't mean just because some website goes away and we step in and sort of save it, that we can make it accessible. One of the things that we did with, and again, I don't want to talk too much about my previous employer, but tried to do, Jeff, don't laugh. Organizations the option, if they wanted their most recent issues kept behind a wall that only they had access to. So it sort of helped them sort of be a little more comfortable with something that they can give their members. So the copyright's a really tricky thing, especially when you're talking about things like journals. My wife works at Penn State University, and she deals with this a lot with science journals. She deals with professors who teach at the university. Their article goes in a science journal, and then the owner of that journal sells that to the latest digital provider. And she's had professors come to her and say, like, I didn't give you permission to do that and give that to that entity. So there's a lot of different ramifications, but that's a big one that sometimes we don't think of.
Yeah, copyright law is not getting simpler, especially with digital management of that. However, there was a Supreme Court decision going back maybe 15 or 20 years, National Geographic versus Greenberg or Green somebody, where the determination was that the author, when it comes to a situation like that, the author loses the right to control republication. But it was complicated because National Geographic could reproduce it in print, but not digitally, because that was a different medium. So yeah, there are myriad complexities in copyright alone as an impediment to succeeding in preservation. But
I'd like to jump in a couple small things on the copyright issue, and this is a big hairy mess. One thing that publications can do, and this is something in the best practices category, is they can develop a copyright statement for their future authors, and even ask prior authors to sign off on it, whereby the permission is granted in all forms now present or not yet existing, and that all such matters are decisions are given to the publication owner, not the author. There's specific legal language to use, but this is possible to overcome it. Now, that may turn some authors off, but at the same time, if they truly have an interest in the long-term dissemination of their information, they should give it serious consideration. But this is also related, that's a forward-looking issue, and this is related to the whole thing in general about all of this, is that we got two different tracks here. One is, what do we do about what already exists? And then what do we do about what is going to come to exist in the future? And unfortunately, one thing humans don't like to talk about and don't like to think about, and definitely don't like to do, is talk about their own death. And yet this is the subject which has to be addressed, and people have to be brought on board with cooperating with this stuff in general about the preservation of what they've developed. And they also need help, because they can't, the average person, no matter what a wonderfully sophisticated philatelist they are, these are often technology issues, and the average person is not, who's a stamp collector, is more interested in the stamps than the technology. And so if we say, oh, well, you have to just install this program and do this and this and this, you've already lost them. So we need to provide the resources and help to actually do some of these things for them, in terms of preservation and that kind of stuff, and get them on a schedule of grabbing their current status of their project on an ongoing basis every month or something, actually literally grabbing a copy off their computer if they grant permission for you to do that. But that's future looking stuff, and needs to be addressed just as thoroughly as what do we do about things that are already been published or already gone dark, and we have to find ways to recover them.
Yeah, I'm happy to, I'd like to jump in as well, just to follow up, since I mean, a lot of it is going to be documentation, that counts for both what, as a person who took over for Scott's initiatives, I fully understand, you know, we're reaching out for permissions at the moment on the individual level, and for any item that is in the digital library, if we can get them. Now most of it is a good faith effort. Some of the things like that exist in the public domain, like government documents and stuff, we don't really need the permissions for those necessarily, but then there's also copyright issues with stamps themselves, because stamps are a copyrighted object, so that becomes even more difficult when you want to create a reference point for stamps. But also jumping into what Jay was talking about, best practices documentation is something we sorely need in the philatelic community, and that is either as a sort of an entity to kind of step in and help people just submit their materials for, you know, and then covering the preservation purposes, which is something I'll say we're exploring, but of course it's very resource intensive. So the idea of just making any kind of bold claims like that I'm not going to do that at the moment. But the idea of at least a simplified documentation for folks who are interested in preserving their work, people to be able to kind of offer education in that field, even if it's something that, you know, even if it's just like a list of, here's a few things you want to keep in mind when you're, you know, maintaining your digital or your stamp collection, physical or digital, or this is, you know, these might be some things you want to look at, or if they, you know, in previous employments prior to the APS, I worked as a person that would actually meet with schools and things like that. And it was kind of a similar issue, is that you're meeting with an entity that has zero interest in putting a lot of effort into dealing with computers, because they might be annoying, or you know, boring, or it's just ultimately a pain. Other people might feel that way as well. And you know, it's a perfectly understandable thing. You know, you're doing something for fun, and it might be an incredibly vast and incredibly thorough collection, but you're ultimately doing it for fun. And then when you need to do things like preserve or maintain, that becomes work, and it's not fun anymore. So it's, however we can make that process easier for other people, either as a community, larger entities like the APS as well, you know, anything that we can explore to make that easier for people is important for this process. And I mean, I don't know how thoroughly you looked at my notes, Gary, but I definitely wrote the phrase memento mori on top of the notes that I made for this presentation. And I think it is something that it needs to be kind of considered, not in a morbid way, because memento mori isn't even though it's a phrase that deals with death, it isn't a particularly morbid phrase. It's about understanding the life cycle of either the death of yourself, the death of materials, understanding that these things have a life cycle, have a lifespan, and what can we do to either translate these materials to a different entity, or have people step in to kind of shepherd this process a lot more. And I think that's something, it's definitely a dimension of what we're doing here at the well, what me and Marion and everybody else are doing now is we are focusing more on digitization and not necessarily, and preservation and capturing these materials, even if we have to capture them temporarily, building a life cycle into your collection as you're beginning to collect is something that, current and modern and new philatelists will have to think about, and and probably should have been thinking about that the whole time. But so these are things that we're kind of figuring out, and like Natalie's work, of course, is especially, that's exactly what they're doing. They're building these life cycles. They're understanding these life cycles. They're beginning to figure out what to do with these materials. And that's something that we're now starting to do as of, when I stepped into this role. And because we have a lot of physical digital materials, just born digital materials, storage, all of those things have to be addressed when we understand that we need to, maintain the, we have to preserve the hobby as well. It's not just individual materials. I mean, the more we preserve these individual materials, the more we're also going to kind of shepherd and preserve the hobby into the future as well. And that's another even larger concern. So
That point, life cycle considerations is really very critical and an important addition to this dialogue, I think. What's emerging from what the panel is sharing with us is not just the scope of the problem, but the scope of the potential solutions. So the next question I think that emerges is, who gets to decide? How do you prioritize what should or should not be preserved? Who's going to curate all of these undertakings? Any takers?
I mean, that's the nightmare question, really, honestly. Like, I mean, in our case, for the Robert A. Mason Digital Library, that's me, the digitization team, Marion, everybody at the APS. Like, those are, we have to understand we have to weigh all of our materials, what is important for philately, what is important for the collection itself, what is relevant to the hobby. It becomes an incredibly difficult series of questions to ask, and the thing is, when you collect, whatever you collect is going to be the most important thing to you as a philatelist. Like, that is, so there's a million different answers, because the answer is whatever I'm passionate about. So, and we have to sort of digest that, and for a project like this, and understand that everybody is passionate about every single thing, but we can't save everything. And it becomes a really huge question about, like, what is, understanding philately as a whole, what is important to, like, US postal history, world history, things like that. And then also the individual question of, like, what's, like, right now we're kind of in the accumulation phase of the digital library, although we're beginning the curation process now. But a lot of things are just, I'm kind of picking things that are interesting, but also with the understanding in the back of my head that we need to also be maintaining future philately and the broader sort of tradition and culture of philately, as well as providing materials for, potential new philatelists to understand the hobby and then evolve it into the future. So it becomes a very broad series of questions, which I guess I'm giving a non-answer to, Gary.
We're expecting definitive answers.
Yeah.
Questions that we should continue to try and answer. Anybody else want to jump?
I'll speak.
Go ahead.
So Natalie will agree with me, and in absentia, Marion. As librarians, we make those decisions all the time. I mean, what's of value in our collections, physical collections. So you're always making sort of decisions about what's the intrinsic research value of something in your collection. It holds true in the digital form as well. Is this of value to, and not just subject scope, like Natalie's dealing with a very specific area. At the APRO, we were dealing with worldwide. So what's considered what's valuable? We were getting donations all the time, and you had to make those decisions. Is this something that's really going to be of value to researchers going forward? We'd love to preserve this in some way, but is it going to be of research value in the future? In digital, it's even more critical that those decisions, how they're made and who makes them and things like that. You do your best to sort of balance it with, when you're talking about a physical collection, you have a certain amount of space, so you're limited in some ways by that. So
Yeah.
that plays a part in your decision making. It's certainly not the most critical, but sometimes that's there. But when you're talking about digital, it'd be great to sort of preserve. I shouldn't say preserve. It's great to store.
You could say capture, Scott. If you want to say capture.
There's another aspect to this, another plane, so to speak, that comes up. And I referred to this in my article a little bit in a little sideways manner, but the another problem we've got is organizations like the APS or the Green Foundation, et cetera, have a different set of responsibilities to the legal health and liability of the organization. And yet some of the activities that have to be engaged in terms of like scraping websites and stuff, make some lawyers cringe sometimes. And so there is probably activity that has to happen at multiple levels, even if it's guerrilla work that means just capturing, use your word there, Jeff, capturing the content and holding it until such time as it's legally appropriate to disseminate it. Sometimes you have to capture it and then ask for permission to disseminate. It gets fuzzy, and it's harder when you're dealing with organizations that have a whole legal life of their own, and they have to preserve themselves first.
Yeah. Building off of that.
You're not kidding.
Yeah, seriously. Off of that, oh gosh, sorry, no, train of thought. I think that we have sort of sidestepped the question by, like at the Green Foundation, the question you asked, initially by having a narrow scope of the things that we are preserving. And so currently we are only preserving websites that, I know. We are only websites that are created by Canadians who we distinctly interact with in some way to facilitate the transfer, whether it be through their will or through discussions prior to their passing. We have it narrowed down, and we're also only focusing on websites that are Canadian in topic currently. And I think that by having a narrow focus, we kind of avoid some of the trickier questions, honestly, because it's just part of our purview, but these questions are very valid. And I think that having a network, sort of like the Global Philatelic Library Network, having something where we can redirect to other institutions saying, well, we can't really manage that website, that's beyond our scope. Why don't you reach out to the APRL? Why don't you reach out to Munich? Just finding another institution that's the right fit, because people know to go to certain institutions. They know to go to the Green Foundation for Canadian material. It makes sense for us to have Canadian material. And I think that finding, sort of the Cinderella moment, the right shoe, right? In the libraries and larger institutions and clubs can work together to figure out the right home. Yeah.
Scott, I want to follow up on the point that you were making about the owners of archives, the librarians and archivists, make those decisions, those curating decisions all the time for their own property.
Yes.
But how do we solve the problem of the other assets that are out there that nobody else is, the orphaned resources? Who's going to curate a solution for those?
That's a big challenge. First of all, you even have to know they exist in many ways. When I was in my previous position, it was just things that were brought to my attention. I mean, there were times in the day when I would have the opportunity to sort of just search out things, see what was out there on a given topic, but a lot of it was just brought to my attention. And then if it's something that we saw value, and a lot of times it was like the example I used right off the start. A page was brought to my attention, or websites brought to my attention, or database, or whatever brought to my attention that was going away or has gone away. And so that's really where it came into my purview, that, okay, we need to, is this something of value to us? And do we need to sort of save this in some way? So it's a great question, Gary. It's really difficult to sort of know, to even know what's out there. There's just so much. I mean, I think all of us in this room can agree. There's just so much. There's so many different sort of subjects and sub-subjects and subjects in this.
Yes.
And so it's tough to know what all is out there. But I will sort of add one sort of. I was going to use this as my closing statement, but I'll use it now. And all this, a real positive. When I was reaching out to clubs and things like that and organizations, I very rarely, and I mean very, very rarely, had someone say, no, I don't want to share this. What's the great thing about this hobby is, you know, when you're at a stamp show like this, philatelists are willing to share information. And I think the one positive in this hobby that you don't see in a lot of other forms of, I worked with the Park Service before I started at the APS, where researchers are very sort of protective of their data, and they didn't want to share. They had some sort of, there was something not in it for them, but something that was value to them. And I've found quite the opposite in working with philatelists and people who sort of create websites or create databases or create CDs, whatever. So that is a positive. So, but again, I'm not trying to dance around your question, but it's really difficult to know what's out there, to be honest, unless it's brought to your attention, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. And we're trying to explore what that role is going to be for the APRL and the APS in the future, as trying to figure out how we can take a more active role in seeking out, maybe hunting for these orphan materials, and then finding a way to I'm not going to use the word preserve. No, but capture these materials, store these materials, make these materials more accessible to other people. There's so much, and jumping off of what Scott was saying, there's just so much passion in this hobby. I've never met a more passionate group of people. I mean, I've been working for the APS and the APRL since 2022, so I'm still fairly new to in terms of just overall scope to the philatelic community, but there just is such an immense amount of energy and passion devoted to this subject for the people that are in this hobby. It is so the fact that people care is kind of a huge deal for, and it's a giant positive for, what because we're talking about something that feels negative, but I feel like if there's a way to kind of get this, to harness that passion of this community to sort of work on these, preservation methods, or, just collection management best practices, creations, things like that, the community will do it. They're very, they care about what they're doing. They're passionate about what they're doing. It's not a problem. Passion is not a problem. They care very deeply about philately, and that's good.
Sure. I would assert, however, that translating passion into volunteerism is
Yeah, passion and practicality are very different words.
There's a whole list of questions that we were supposed to try and get to, but before we do, in my mind, very important to ultimately coming up with a solution. There are let me call them public assets, those that are run by organizations, whether they are clubs or societies. And then there are the private assets, like I mentioned, the Frajola board and your individual archives. My life is completely stored in Dropbox. So, you know, there are private assets that are in need of curation as well. So for those assets that currently have parents and those that are unfortunately orphaned or about to become orphaned, is it at all feasible to have a centralized organization, however loosely formatted, that could start to address this issue? I mean, we've got this roundtable here today, but what's the next step for beyond this roundtable and the articles that have come out as a result of it? Where do we go from here to continue this dialogue and start to develop solutions, plural? Anybody?
I think one of the, sorry, go ahead.
Well, one idea that comes to mind is the APS must have 100 affiliates or more. So you've got 100 or more specialists affiliates, and it's maybe going to each one of them and saying, look at what do you consult that if it disappeared tomorrow, you would be in serious trouble? And then asking what comes back from that and say, well, this one is pretty stable, it'll be there for a long time. This one, God, the guy's sick and he passed away, and in 3 weeks' time, the URL disappears.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was say, reaching out to clubs and organizations and your local clubs and organizations, start thinking about those things. There may be somebody in your club you probably don't even know that sort of has this really cool database or this website working on. One of the things I was trying to get a handle on when I was with the APRL was exhibits. So I wanted to have an exhibiting form that you are to provide, especially if you win an award of some kind, that you are to provide a digital copy to, if it's the Green, if it's a Canadian exhibit, they can provide it to the Green or the Royal in London, if it's a British, or if it's something that the APRL could use, that you are sort of mandated, if you will. Like a lot of national libraries, I did an internship at the National Library of Canada, and one of the things that's written in there is that if you publish a book in Canada, you have to submit 2 copies of that book to the National Library. And I sort of bring that to philately, that if you're going to produce a book in this hobby, if you're going to produce an exhibit that you send us, or whoever, it doesn't have to be the APRL, but I mean, if you send it a copy that it's preserved somewhere. So that's a first step that I think is really doable. Now, how that gets all, the group that sort of makes that all happen, I don't know, but
Me either.
I have to think along those lines about, those are the first steps that we sort of need to think about. Go ahead, sorry, the copies that.
Okay, if I'm hogging the floor.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, go ahead.
There must be 2,000, 3,000 frames. Okay, the person puts up their 2, 4, 5 page exhibit filled with all sorts of really valuable information they dug up. They send it to auction, covers are taken off, covers are sold, the pages are thrown away. Why not have some means saying, we need scans? Submit your exhibit, but we want scans, and we're asking your permission to put that exhibit up on a website to preserve that stuff.
Yeah, well, one of the last things I did sort of almost out the door when I was at the APS was cool material. I wanted to scan a single page that the philatelic material, and I did. I got it done, but it was one of the things, I didn't know what to do with it. Marion's still dealing with the librarian there now, but I completely agree. Like, why not sort of scan that? Think if those exhibits down there were searchable. That whole exhibit floor, if you could search that, just extraordinary information. Yes.
So, I just recently graduated with bachelor's degree finally. One of the things that I was constantly on was like EBSCOs
Yes.
that sort of thing. Do we know any way to sort of, off-source our labor onto some other organization that's not allowed?
It is a question that we are asking at the APS quite a bit. We're trying to figure out how to outsource it in a useful way, a practical way, a way that is doesn't waste resources or time. A lot of it is also to ensure that we are. So I guess to lift the veil slightly, right now, as of the first 6 months of my job, I have increased the ability to capture and digitize materials on site in a way that we've never had before. So now we can move a lot faster in terms of gathering resources, which prior to that may have been dependent on an outside entity. But we're not we're still open to the idea of pairing with other organizations, and in some cases, for materials that are provided for the digital library, we will cooperate with other stamp societies to kind of capture those materials on a voluntary basis and have them provide them to us if they're able to do so. So the ideal would be to have kind of both meeting in the middle. So part of my job is to sort of increase the APRL's ability to capture more and more materials in a fast and convenient way, as well as reach out to the communication and communicate with all of these outside vendors in the area that do bulk digitization, as well as individual stamp societies that may already be archiving their materials, and then we can benefit from their labor. So it's and then we're also exploring like volunteer options and stuff within the organization as well. So there's a lot of tendrils that are kind of going out to figure out what we can do in terms of outside resources from the APRL. So we are exploring that idea. It is something that we are looking towards. A lot of it will be kind of understanding resource management and sort of materials management. A broader concern is that these outsourced entities, if we have fragile or rare or difficult to digitize materials, shipping that off to a third party that may be untested or unvetted might create a problem where if they mishandle the materials and we end up making the situation worse than better. So there's a lot of those type of concerns, but we are definitely exploring the idea of third parties getting involved with our efforts in terms of capturing and storing and digesting materials as well. But a lot of it's just making sure that these vendors are worth using, and also creating workflows and pipelines for volunteers to kind of step in and be able to do the job in a way that's more effective than just having them kind of show up and then throw a bunch of materials at them and see what they do, which I'd rather not do that. But it's and also just the other tendril, just sort of increasing our resources internally to develop workflows to capture things, improving equipment so that we can capture things faster and more effectively with less people, which is also helpful. So a lot of it is sort of increasing efficiency as well. So I guess there's sorry, the long-winded journey to like, yes, we're looking at it. But yeah, it is something we are concerned about. We would like to be able to kind of use as many resources as possible to get what we need done.
Gary, in your question about organization and how to does there need to be an organization, or does there need to be some kind of entity overarching all of this? I sort of heard some things there that I've been thinking about for a long time, and the problems, as I see it, that we've got are that there are humans involved. Very annoying. But another issue involved with that is that all of the organizations currently working in this area have multiple priorities. They do other things as well. And they're all, I don't think there's any of them, any philatelic organization on the planet that has enough money to do what they want to do as it is right now. I look at this and wonder if there doesn't need to eventually, once this is more figured out, eventually a absolutely one purpose only organization that's worldwide become created, that's endowed with a serious amount of money. I'm talking a very serious amount of money, 9 figures, 10 figures, so it can live on that in perpetuity. And we're also looking at time frames in hundreds of years. At least that's the way I think. I'm a little weird, but and most humans don't worry about, you know, what's going to happen 30 or 50 years from now, to say nothing of 200 years from now. So if funding, endowment can be found, an organization created that has absolutely only one purpose, and the organization can achieve some degree of quasi, I don't know, official's not the right word, but in other words, that it can't be repurposed just because another board got voted in and they now the board wants to do something else with all this wonderful money. If something like that can come out of this long term, and even if it's really only a supplier of technology, a supplier of hosting, providing those thousands of servers that'll eventually be needed to run this kind of thing, and as a clearinghouse of information, because we don't need capture of we don't need 5 people capturing the same stuff. You know, there needs to be some kind of organization of the capture resources, and to bring that all together. But the problem is humans are terrible at these kinds of projects. Unless they're, you know, somebody shooting at them or something like that, they just, you know, they're like cats, and it's hard to keep them all going in the same direction for a period of 2 years, to say nothing of 25 years or 100 years or 200 years. But I think my way of thinking, when we start talking about organization at a much higher level, we need to be thinking about, how the heck does this get funded? Where does that come from?
So you're going back to the point about lottery tickets again.
Yes, and it's interesting, he brought up, part of what I was gonna say is there, in kind of the midterm, I mean, we're talking long-term goal, but it's steps to get there, and maybe one of the first steps is looking at a company who has maybe a hosting solution, who can work with the APS or APRL or organization to at least move these sites onto. Then you're not worried about capturing it, because like, I believe you mentioned, you have some sites where it's basically, you're holding it static at that point, and that may be what that person wants. Or if it's a form, then a way that, okay, I have a stamp form, let whoever, I'm just gonna say the APS to put it out there. Yes, is partnering with, that's who I go to support. And then all of those other things that you talk about, long-term capture, the technology has changed, because I can remember storing things on cassette tapes. So that is always gonna be perpetually, the medium changes, but to have a technology partner, to me, looks like the first step. I mean, will we be able to save every website? Probably not. But if you're already hosting it, you'll kind of already have maybe that in, and maybe part of that agreement. If I host my website with you, then, that that whole permissions can be built in, that if I'm, you know, if I'm done with it, then, you'll maintain it static and, you know,
Mhm.
and I've agreed to it going out.
So the challenges you're identifying are permissions to move forward, the infrastructure to put it on, and then the leadership to ensure that it happens.
And the infrastructure is there, and
Oh, sure.
to me, it's finding the right partner.
Okay.
The hard part, I think, is the third part, which is finding a group, a committee, an organization, something to help manage this.
Yeah, which was Jay's point about
Yeah.
a single purpose organization.
Yeah.
Doug?
It seems to me there are two key points we haven't touched on yet. The first one is thousands of years ago, the Library of Alexandria was a repository of Western knowledge. And it was a single point. And when that single point failed,
Mhm.
it no longer exists. There are countless documents that have been lost to humanity as a result. So I think it's essential to be a distributed solution. If a natural disaster hits the APRL and the only copy of something is there, that's a terrible loss in many ways. So that's the first point. I think if we depend on an entity with an endowment going forward, there's countless things that can go wrong. Alta Vista and AOL Search were the be all and end all when I started in the internet, and they don't exist for that purpose. So we have to make sure that it's something which is available from multiple sources, and when one of them fails, it's seamless that we pick it up elsewhere. The second point is sometimes new interests develop in philately, specifically here for philately. Imagine that somebody decided that barcodes were of interest. Now, how are we going to go back 40 years and search the exhibits, the published papers, your scans and indexes, and find when was it that this barcode began? I happen to be the guy who cares. And I can tell thing to find, and every dealer I've talked to admits, and even my own archives, when the new barcodes came out for flats in 2005, which took me 20 years to finally figure out the APS in February, nobody knows anything about them, and it's by pure luck that I have a 40-year run of US specialists, and I'm writing a paper right now about the advent of those barcodes, because I can look at the cover of every issue back 40 years and see when they first appeared, even though the Postal Service denies their existence to this day. They denied its existence with 2 Freedom of Information Act requests. And finally, a clerk in Hartford happened to know, sent me the Federal Register report announcing it in 2005.
No, that
To-
represents real, that represents a
touch-
Even
real-
UV scans, let's say we scan all the exhibits, none of the fluorescent markings are gonna be visible. And if somebody figures out in 5 years that there's a new marking we didn't know about, there's no way to find them.
Well, and that's part of why physical items are so valuable. Right? Like, I think that having digitized versions of exhibits to see the interpretation that was done around material, I think that's very valuable, but you're completely right. Looking at a stamp in person is such a different experience from looking at it online. And I think that in the conversation around digital stuff, we don't want to assume that digital is always the solution for some things. I think that for, like I said, the knowledge that is in the exhibit, very valuable to record digitally, because that sort of thing can be dismantled very easily and will be most likely dismantled. When it comes to the physical objects, you know, obviously no one in here is going to throw away the covers after
No.
the point there. But to touch on your first question, I think that there's something that, as institutions, when we say that we are archiving a website, or we're maintaining and saving a website, it's not just one copy of it that we're maintaining. We should have multiple copies in multiple locations. And so that's when having good backups comes into play. So at the Green Foundation, for example, we ought to have, we do have 2 copies on 2 different storage mediums of the item. And then we also have a cloud offsite storage of it as well. So if the Green Foundation, which it won't, burns down, then real wood, not just my head, were to burn down, we would still have the cloud version accessible. If the cloud storage site we're using GitHub, so it's somewhere in, I think, Siberia, if it were to disintegrate in some dramatic situation, we would still have our copies. If one of our hard drives fails, the other one is there. So you have to have those multiple ways. But I do agree that I think having plans for access copies to be made available from other institutions as well, I think that that's a very valid thing to think about. And tricky backups, you create them, but you have to maintain them as well. So that's part of why having an institution that does have some funding behind the program, or if someone leaves their website to us, leaving a little maintenance money along with it, that's the sort of thing that can make sure that we're able to maintain these sites as well. So
I think also that for the stamp, say you want to do a new technology for X-ray analysis of the inks,
yeah,
which of course there's been a lot of writing about lately. Again, back and look at any of the archives to check it out, except for the originals.
Yeah,
To jump. Oh, good.
kind of say, which is like any sort of digital management plan or policy would include that. You would never store it just one location. It would always be multiple copies in different locations and different types of media, things like that. So that's built in, but it's a valid point to raise. Yeah.
We recommend that for individuals as well. If you're
Absolutely.
worried about backups, do what I
Just to jump in, all of these things are on my whiteboard. Like everything from the last like 20 minutes is I have a list on. These are all concerns that we have for this going forward with our digital library and any other digitization projects. So it is, yeah, everything everyone has said is exactly what we're concerned about as well. And a decentralized storage is crucial for any kind of digital project. So it is massively important. And then just as a side note, I'm incredibly fascinated by the fact that you're studying barcodes. That's really wild. I love it. That's wonderful. I would love to read your writing once you finish it. That's cool.
60 articles published. I'll send you my resume.
Oh my God. Sure, go ahead. That'd be great.
There's one that I want to pose to the panel. That what we've discussed in many ways today is disconcerting, but to put a sense of, I don't know how many of you attended Susan Smith's discussion on philatelic research in Washington, but she spoke of the challenges that the federal government and its various instrumentalities face in addressing the same problems that we are talking about here, which is perpetually access to everything that the government is all about. So if you think philately has challenges, you ain't seen none. But the government is addressing those, and we should too. And that gets to my final question for this group, which is, what should be the next step to be taken in pursuing these challenges?
I think you start, my personal opinion is you start on the grassroots level. So go back to your clubs, go back to your organizations, start talking about this, start talking about what you want to preserve, what might be out there that, as was brought up, some site that we've never heard of that this person uses, or the information that's out there. Think along those terms, and start building sort of a list of resources that you use for your type of collecting. That's what I would start. It can be as basic as that.
Yeah, I definitely piggyback that idea, and just, yeah, the community is going to be a place to go first. And then, of course, understanding accessibility, just making our materials as accessible to each other as possible is going to be incredibly crucial. Don't be nervous to talk about the thing that you are passionate about. Reach out to everybody else in the community and let them know what you're working on. Let the APS know what you're working on. Anybody, be as open with it as possible. But accessibility, understanding sustainability, that memento mori, just think about what you're working on. Think about how it could create a legacy for someone else in the future. How, what you're studying is that node is part of the vast network of philatelic resources that you and me and everybody else in this community is creating. And it's important. And like, don't put your light under a bushel, so to speak. It's important. Our contributions to the community are important, and they should be valued. And I think understanding that value will help people kind of move forward and realize, how to create that, or the importance of creating that legacy, even if computers are annoying, or even if storage is expensive. As we kind of come together as a community piece by piece, I think we'll help move and preserve philately for future generations. So that's at least I hope so.
Yeah, I agree with everything that y'all have said so far for next steps. I think because community is so essential, but I think that also at an individual level, thinking about what I said at the beginning, making a digital estate plan, figuring out what with your material, what you want to have happen, and then starting those steps of reaching out. I think even just taking a bit of a digital audit, seeing what, I don't know, make sure that you have consistent file names in your materials if you're going to be donating your digital holdings somewhere, so people know. They don't see IMG 0505 or whatever, they see the image, so they know what they're looking at, if you are going to be giving your material another life after you're gone. So I think that just making a plan, please plan ahead. We like plans. That would be great. And I think more conversations like this will be really essential as we keep going forward. And probably, I won't speak for everyone, but I will kind of, and anyone can opt out, email us if you have questions about this sort of thing. If you don't know where, please email us. We love to get reference questions. It makes us very happy. And we're working on these problems actively, and seeing what people care about and what questions they have helps us direct what we're going to do. So
yeah, I agree. And even if it creates more work for me, I agree.
My thought about the first next step is the open and public drafting, perhaps through a wiki type platform or something where everybody can contribute, of best practices. And there's several threads to that, of course. For example, what Natalie was just referring to, about developing the plan and so forth. Develop a best practices document that is approachable, understandable, and is more reassuring than terrifying, which it could be. Make that an open process to bring in as many people as possible, not only because you want their buy-in, but because people have great ideas. To use that as a launching pad, so that once people start to realize what they can do or what help is available, then they might actually start doing it. And then Natalie and Jeff and their folks in those positions will have more people approaching them with donations of born digital assets.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. There's an overarching theme that seems to be emerging, maybe two, is that succession planning, life cycle planning, needs to be the concern of all of us. I guess the second thing is go buy lottery tickets. Thank you very much, folks.